38 people watched a woman die and did nothing. That is the story the whole world believed for decades. It launched 1,000 psychology lectures and changed American law. There is just one problem. The story was wrong. This is the true story of Kitty Genovese, the murder that fooled the world, and what really happened. Kitty Genovese was 28 years old. She worked at a bar. She lived in Kew Gardens, a quiet neighborhood in Queens. Neighbors knew her as warm and quick to laugh. She remembered every regular at the bar. On March 13, 1964, she finished her shift late and drove home alone through the freezing early morning darkness. In the early hours, she parked near her building. A stranger stepped out of the darkness behind her. His name was Winston Moseley, 29, a quiet machine operator who had driven out that night hunting for a victim. Kitty ran for the street. He caught her under a streetlight and stabbed her twice in the back. A neighbor named Robert Moser shouted from his window, "Let that girl alone." The attacker turned and ran. Here is the part the famous story leaves out. The shout worked. Help had answered. Badly wounded, she staggered around the corner toward her doorway, out of sight of nearly every window on the street. That detail matters. When Moseley returned about 10 minutes later, almost nobody could actually see what happened next. He found her lying in a narrow hallway. It was at the back of the building. He attacked her again. A neighbor named Carl Ross opened his door, saw the attack, panicked and finally telephoned the police for help. Another neighbor, Sophia Farrer, raced downstairs into that dark hallway, not knowing if the killer was still inside. She held Kitty in her arms until the ambulance came. Kitty died on the way to the hospital. Kitty did not die ignored. She died in a neighbor's arms, and the world never heard that part. 2 weeks later, the New York Times ran a front-page story with a headline that would echo for decades. 37 who saw murder did not call the police. Inside, the article raised the number of witnesses to 38. It claimed they watched from their windows. They watched for more than half an hour, and they never lifted a finger. That number came from the police commissioner, chatting over lunch with a Times editor. Nobody ever verified it. The story exploded. Preachers, politicians, and newspapers worldwide blamed the cold indifference of the modern American city. Two young psychologists, John Darley and Bibb Latané, read the coverage and asked a very different question about crowds. Maybe people freeze not because they do not care, but because everyone assumes someone else will act. They tested it. In their experiments, something strange emerged. People who believed they were the only witness nearly always got up to help. But when people believed others could also hear it, most stayed frozen. They called it diffusion of responsibility. The bystander effect became one of the most famous findings in psychology, printed in nearly every textbook on Earth. Then, in 2007, researchers went back to the original records, and the famous story fell apart. They found no evidence that 38 people watched a murder. Most heard a scream and saw nothing. Many mistook the cries for a drunken quarrel spilling out of a nearby bar. Most rolled over. And in 1964, calling for help meant finding your local precinct's number and hoping somebody picked up. Kitty's case helped change that. 4 years later, America rolled out a single emergency number, 911. Winston Moseley was arrested 6 days after the murder. He confessed to everything and died in prison in 2016. The story that taught the world nobody helps was wrong. Someone shouted, someone called, and someone held her.